Okay, so today we're going to do a quick stream because I have to go to school very soon. But I want to talk through some ideas on a video I'd like to make about productivity, specifically for entrepreneurship, and what I feel matters. So we can even just like talk through it together for entrepreneurs. I do everything in Lexend, by the way. So if I am to start a trend, I want to do it that way. And so why even talk about this? Why even talk about this, right? There's so much info out there. Lots of info out there. But to me, like, the most persuasive speakers are all very like hardcore, or they just really glorify. They glorify and romanticize things a lot because it's like that's what makes the ideas really catchy. But it's too much, and I think they lose sight of um. So, what's actually important? They lose sight of what's actually important, right? So these people, even like my girl, people I talk to, they like David Goggins, right? He's not an entrepreneur. Well, he is, but he's not traditionally like a business person. But people like that, people like Gary Vee, um, who basically say just you need to sacrifice a lot, you need to be really hardcore, and you need to be obsessed, and that's what matters. To an extent, that's true. Those are all important factors, but I think they're important insofar as they facilitate these three things. So, what's actually important to me is prioritization, decision making, and this one's a little fuzzy, but rhythm. How do you spell that? There you go. Prioritization, decision making, and rhythm. And I actually have, um, I use these words. These words are pretty meaningful to me, but I'd have to like definitely elaborate them for them to make sense to you. So, prioritization, right? We'll go one by one. So, why is prioritization important? What we're looking for is gains in productivity, right? To be clear, that's what this whole presentation is about. And I'd like to frame these gains, or at least the way we're getting these gains is through minimizing opportunity cost. So I frame gains in productivity, achieving gains in productivity by minimizing opportunity cost, at least as it pertains to prioritization. And so, like, how does that look? Basically, so prioritization. The way prioritization looks to me is actually more about saying no to things. And so opportunity cost is basically the idea that if I, for example, want to read a book, that on paper is a good thing. Maybe reading that book will give me knowledge and will progress me closer to my goals. So let's say I read the book for 2 hours. At the end of those 2 hours, I'm closer to my goals in some sense, right? I'm smarter, I'm better. Um, so you might consider that as a good thing. But, and it is a good thing, but evaluating the priority of that action, reading the book, we might be able to make the judgment that a different action would move the needle more, would bring me even closer to my goals. So let's say that's like prospecting clients, right? That's, talking to customers, or that is, outreaching to people on LinkedIn and trying to sell to them. I use those as an example because those are right now the highest leverage activities for me. So when I'm choosing to read a book, I'm in a sense choosing not to just do more outreach, for example. And so there's an opportunity cost there, such that if I trade 2 hours of outreach for 2 hours of reading a book, relatively speaking, I'm farther away from my goals. And so prioritization looks like saying no to things, to me. It also looks like blocking things out in a calendar. Blocking things out in a calendar instead, not a notepad. So I think the reason why I frame it this way too is because I used to write out my to-do list and my tasks just in a notepad, or text it to myself. And so I'd have this long list of, walk the dog, study, do this, do that. And the problem is, a notepad can just like expand and expand and expand. And you kind of get some good feeling from even just like writing down your goals. So it is really counterintuitive to prioritizing just the things that are really, really important. And yeah, so to me, this all works together. Anytime I decide to like take an action or plan to take an action, I consider it against the things that I know would create the most progress for me. Right now, that's talking to customers or potential customers. And when I do write things down on paper, or I do, create the action plan for me, I always do it in a calendar rather than a notepad, so that it's basically constrained by time, like inherently, and it can't just expand and expand and expand down a page. A final important thing to note about how this looks for me is that it's all focused on inputs, not outputs. And so rather than like objective-oriented goals, it's best to plan the specific actions you want to take. So this could look like, quotas, or like time commitments. Or, milestones, right? But you want these to be as specific as possible. And basically the reason is these are actionable, right? Anything you write down should be an action that you can constrain to a period of time and measure the success or like failure to complete that action. Okay, so that's all about how to do those things. And great, we can just move on. So after prioritization, let's talk about rhythm, actually. And the reason I want to talk about rhythm, um, so why is rhythm important to me? Rhythm creates the ability for consistent and focused actions. So, to me, rhythm is the, I guess, replacement, or it's what replaces the hardcoreness to me. So, I feel like a lot of people are selling the idea that consistent and focused actions can be created through motivation, right? So, this is not motivation. This is not even discipline, but the discipline is important. It's rhythm. So, how do you create rhythm? A big part of it relates to prioritization. Firstly, you minimize task switching. Minimize task switching. And this is done by blocking time and accounting for everything in your calendar. So, task switching to me, I actually notice a big productivity loss if I need to task switch a lot. Other people report, at least anecdotally, that it doesn't matter to them. But at least in my own experience and the data that I've looked into, there's been some studies on it. It greatly reduces productivity if you're switching between, two different things. If you're multitasking, essentially. And also, um, you know, committing to not task switch also it like makes you emphasize blocking things out in your calendar very effectively. Because if I don't allow myself to multitask, that means everything needs to have its own time, like on my calendar visibly. It needs to be accounted for. And so to me, maybe at first it might lead to some sticky situations where you need to improvise and you do need to multitask, right? Maybe your first 2 weeks of doing this, time blocking and only one task at a time, in practice it might look different than your schedule on paper. That's always the case to an extent. But, after just a few weeks of like really committing to this, I think you'll get a lot of productivity gains. What else is rhythm to me? I'll give you very specific recommendations, or at least a very specific example of what I do. I see 5 to 12 a.m. or 5 a.m. to noon as basically a period for me to execute. This is basically what other people call deep work. Okay. From noon to 6, I collaborate, or for some people this is meetings, right? I collaborate, I go to school, and I work with people. Later you'll see I'll make decisions during this time as well. And then 6 to 9 p.m. I rest. I have fun. Cool. So, I mean, these are my very, very, very specific recommendations. But here's an example of how I create rhythm, right? So this allows me to minimize task switching, right? There's clear intent in each of these time blocks. And it allows me to basically stack consistent and focused actions over time. So a note about consistency is that the opposite of consistency, in a sense, is like staying up late into the night and just throwing your schedule out the window, right? So the opposite of consistency is racing towards your goal in a way, right? Like if you were to make the analogy to a marathon, the opposite of a consistent pace would be to sprint full speed and to exert yourself as much as possible, right? So there's an effective amount to really exert yourself, an effective amount to push the limit per se. Again, we're maximizing for productivity over even like over a few days or over the long term, technically, but importantly, we're not maximizing for productivity moment to moment. We're doing it over the course of time. And a note on focus. To me, focus is emergent. Focus, when I think about focus, I think about flow. And flow is there, focus is there when it's not impeded by distractions. And that's why I like to work in the morning. I like to wake up very close to flow state, and I can just work. As you can see, I literally rolled out of bed. I can just speak. I can make a PowerPoint. I can think about things step by step very clearly. No one's spoken to me. I haven't, consumed my social media feed. I haven't, had a bunch of ideas thrown into my head or distractions thrown into my head. These are all really important for me. And so that's what it looks like for me, right? Okay. Next slide. Let's talk about decision making. And a note on, so that's why I basically collaborate with people, or this is where I see the importance of meetings. So let me just think for a second. Why? Okay, so decision making is super important. To illustrate that, I'll give an example. If you make decisions end of week versus end of day, you move 7 times faster in business. Someone said that, and I thought it was really eye-opening. And you may have seen this in your own life as well, right? It's not just in business. There is an appropriate amount of time to think about a decision. Because thinking doesn't give you any new information. And thinking often biases your fears more than is appropriate for business, right? Where you need to take some risks. So there is an appropriate amount of thinking that you want to aim for, and to me, that is a very well-structured conversation. So this to me equals a structured conversation. Like, that could be 15 to 60 minutes. But very infrequently is it longer than that. Or you identify what information would greatly reduce the risk, right? So with decision making, you want to make good decisions to reduce your risk, right? But on the individual level, I think most people in business struggle with managing risk, in that they try to reduce risk too much. At the end of the day, you have to take lots of calculated risks at every step, in every element of business, like in the team that you choose to associate with and work with, the industry you choose to enter, the mechanism you choose to take. In everything, there's lots of risk, and so you want to consider risk, but avoid trying to minimize risk and instead make up for it with volume. Okay? So you're like a gambler, right? But over time you learn the game, so you're not really a gambler. But yeah, so you make up for risk with volume. You think the appropriate amount, not multiple days, usually. Usually it's one structured conversation. If there is information that would greatly reduce the risk, you can confer a decision to after you get that information. You can delay the decision, but really beat it into your brain that you need to probably take more risk on than you're comfortable with, and make up for that discomfort with doing way more volume of actions, right? Cool. Now, if you can do all these things, right? If you can prioritize effectively, create rhythm in your schedule, and effectively make decisions, again, not thinking too much and doing a lot of volume, it creates the foundation for consistent and focused actions. And it's what actually matters, at least to me, for productivity, to increase productivity for entrepreneurs. That's my spiel. If anyone's here, I wish someone was here and I could answer questions. But I plan to turn that into a video very soon. I have thoughts on these kinds of topics and other topics as well. So thank you so much for watching. I will get ready now. I have to go soon. This was very fun.